7-year-old Alex was different from other kids, but nobody knew it yet. While his friends played video games and watched cartoons, he would sit quietly in corners listening to sounds that others ignored. The hum of the refrigerator, the rhythm of raindrops on the window, the musical way his mother's voice rose and fell when she talked on the phone. Everything had a melody to him. His family lived in a small apartment above his uncle's grocery store. Money was always tight. His parents worked long hours at the local factory, making parts for cars they could never afford to buy. They had come to this country with nothing but hope and determination, speaking broken English and dreaming of a better life for their son. The old piano in his grandmother's house was falling apart. Half the keys stuck and it hadn't been tuned in years. But to Alex it was the most beautiful thing in the world. Every Sunday when they visited grandmother for dinner, he would sneak away from the adults and run his small fingers across the yellowed keys. His grandmother would find him there, lost in his own world. She never scolded him for making noise. Instead, she would sit beside him on the creaky bench and tell him stories about her own childhood, when music filled every corner of their old country home. One rainy Sunday afternoon changed everything. The family was gathered in the small living room, and the old radio was playing classical music. Alex had never heard anything like it before. The melody seemed to dance in the air, telling a story without words. His eyes grew wide as he listened to every note, every pause, every crescendo. When the piece ended, the announcer said it was Chopin's Minute Waltz. Alex didn't know who Chopin was, but he knew he had to play that music himself. He slipped away from the grown-ups and went to the piano. His tiny fingers found the keys as if they had always known the way. Note by note, the melody came flowing out. It wasn't perfect. Some notes were wrong, and his timing was off. But the heart of the music was there, pure and true. The conversation in the next room stopped. His mother appeared in the doorway, her mouth open in surprise. Then his father came, then his grandmother, then his uncle and aunt. They all stood there watching this little boy play music he had never learned. His mother started crying. Not sad tears, but the kind that come when something impossible becomes real. She had scrubbed floors and worked night shifts for years, dreaming that her son might have opportunities she never had. But this was beyond her wildest dreams. His father, a quiet man who rarely showed emotion, knelt down beside the piano bench. In his broken English, he whispered, "Play it again, son." Alex played it again, and this time it was better. His small hands were finding their way, guided by something deeper than training or technique. It was as if the music was already inside him, waiting to come out. His grandmother wiped her eyes with her apron. She had played piano as a young girl, before war and poverty forced her to leave everything behind. She had always regretted not being able to give her children music lessons. Now, watching her grandson, she felt like maybe the music had found its way back to their family after all. Word spread quickly through their small community. Neighbors who had known the family for years suddenly saw them differently. The quiet factory worker and his wife had raised a child with a gift that nobody could explain. Mrs. Johnson from down the street had taught piano for 40 years before retiring. She offered to give Alex free lessons, just to see what he could do with proper instruction. His parents were nervous about accepting charity, but they knew this was bigger than their pride. The first lesson was supposed to last 30 minutes. It stretched to 2 hours. Mrs. Johnson had taught hundreds of students, but she had never seen anything like this. Alex absorbed everything instantly. Show him a scale once and he could play it perfectly. Teach him a simple song and he would add his own variations that made it more beautiful. But it wasn't just his technical ability that amazed her. It was the way he felt the music. When he played sad pieces, you could see the emotion in his face. When he played something joyful, his whole body seemed to light up. He didn't just play notes. He spoke a language that touched people's hearts. Within months, Alex was playing pieces that students usually learned after years of practice. His small hands could barely reach an octave, but he found ways to make the music work. He would stand on the pedals to use them, or play parts with one hand while the other took a short rest. His parents started saving every penny they could for a piano of their own. They ate simpler meals, turned off lights to save electricity, and his mother took on extra cleaning jobs. They didn't buy new clothes or go to movies. Every sacrifice was worth it to keep the music alive in their son. The day they brought home their used upright piano was like Christmas, and birthdays all rolled into one. It had scratches and scuffs, and one of the legs was wobbly, but it was theirs. Alex played it until his parents begged him to let them sleep. At school, Alex was still a regular kid. He played soccer during recess and struggled with math homework like everyone else. But after school, he lived in a different world. He would practice for hours, never getting bored, never complaining that his fingers hurt. His teacher noticed that music helped him with other subjects too. When he read poetry, he found the rhythm in the words. In history class, he could remember dates better if he turned them into little melodies. Music wasn't just something he did. It was how his brain worked. By the time Alex turned 8, people from other neighborhoods were coming to hear him play at the community center. Local newspaper reporters wrote articles about the factory worker's son who could make angels weep with his music. But Alex didn't understand what all the fuss was about. To him, playing piano was as natural as breathing. His grandmother would sit in the front row at every little performance, beaming with pride. She would remember her own childhood dreams and feel grateful that music had found its way back to her family. The gift that had been lost was blooming again in her grandson's hands. Sometimes late at night, Alex would play very softly so he wouldn't wake his parents. The music seemed even more magical in the darkness, like a secret conversation between him and the piano. He would close his eyes and let his fingers find their own way, creating melodies that no one had ever heard before. His parents would listen from their bedroom, holding hands and wondering how they had been blessed with such a miracle. They knew their son was special, but they also knew that being special came with responsibilities. They would do whatever it took to help his gift grow, even if it meant sacrificing everything they had. At 9 years old, Alex was already playing with the local youth orchestra. The adult musicians were amazed by this little boy who could keep up with players twice his age. His timing was perfect, his memory was flawless, and his understanding of music was deeper than many professionals. Nobody knew it yet, but they were watching the beginning of something extraordinary. A journey that would take this factory worker's son to the greatest concert halls in the world, and eventually to a moment that would change everything. By the time Alex turned 14, his reputation had spread far beyond their small town. Music teachers from the city would make special trips just to hear him play. Some offered to teach him for free, knowing they were witnessing something rare and beautiful. The old piano in their apartment was no longer enough. Alex had outgrown it like a teenager outgrows clothes. He needed a real instrument, one that could handle the complex pieces he was learning. But good pianos cost more money than his family made in 2 years. That's when Professor Williams entered their lives. She taught at the state university and had heard recordings of Alex playing at local competitions. When she finally heard him in person, she sat in stunned silence for several minutes after he finished. She offered something that seemed impossible: a full scholarship to the summer music camp at Riverside Academy. It was where the children of doctors and lawyers went to study with world-class teachers. Alex's parents were terrified and excited at the same time. Their son would be surrounded by kids who had been taking private lessons since they were toddlers, kids whose parents could afford anything they needed. The first day at camp was overwhelming. Alex had never seen so many expensive instruments in one place. Some students had violins worth more than his father made in 5 years. They talked casually about trips to Europe and concerts at famous halls. Alex felt like he was from another planet. But when he sat down at the grand piano in the main hall, everything else disappeared. The music was the same, whether you were rich or poor. The keys responded to his touch the same way they always had. Within minutes, a crowd had gathered to listen. The other students stopped talking. Teachers paused their lessons. Even the maintenance workers stopped what they were doing to hear this skinny kid from the wrong side of town play like his life depended on it. Among the listeners was David Kim, a 17-year-old violin prodigy whose parents had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on his musical education. He had always been the star at every camp, every competition, every master class. But listening to Alex play, he felt something he had never experienced before. He was hearing music that came from somewhere deeper than technique. David became Alex's first real friend in the classical music world. Despite their different backgrounds, they shared the same obsession with perfection, the same hunger to be better today than they were yesterday. They would practice together for hours, pushing each other to new levels. The camp director, Dr. Rodriguez, had taught music for 30 years. She had seen talented students come and go, but Alex was different. He didn't just play music, he lived it. Every phrase had meaning, every note had purpose. She started giving him private lessons, refusing to accept payment from his family. The other teachers noticed too. Word spread through the professional music community about the factory worker's son, who could make grown men cry with his playing. By the end of that summer, Alex had received 3 scholarship offers to prestigious music schools. Choosing was the hardest decision his family had ever faced. Each school represented a different path, a different future. His parents spent sleepless nights weighing options they never thought they would have. They asked questions they didn't know how to ask, about things they didn't understand. Alex chose Eastwick Conservatory, not because it was the most famous, but because Professor Chen promised to treat him like family. She had grown up poor too, and she understood the pressure of carrying your family's dreams on your shoulders. The day Alex left for conservatory was the hardest day of his mother's life. She had spent 18 years watching her son grow, helping with homework, making his favorite meals. Now he was going to a world she couldn't follow him into, where she couldn't protect him or help him. His father drove him to the school in their old car, the same car they had saved money to buy when Alex was 10. The campus was beautiful, with old brick buildings covered in ivy and perfectly manicured lawns. Students walked around carrying instrument cases that cost more than his father's car. Alex's dormitory room was smaller than his bedroom at home, but it had something he had never had before, a good piano all to himself. He could practice any time he wanted, as long as he wanted, without worrying about disturbing the neighbors. The first semester was brutal. He was competing with students who had advantages he couldn't imagine. Some had been studying music theory since elementary school. Others spoke 3 languages and had performed in famous halls across Europe. They talked about composers like they were old friends, referencing performances and recordings that Alex had never heard of. But in the practice rooms, none of that mattered. Alex threw himself into his studies with an intensity that worried his teachers. He would practice 12 hours a day, only stopping to eat and sleep. His fingers developed calluses, then blisters, then calluses again. While other students went to parties and football games, Alex lived in the music building. He learned every piece his teachers assigned, then taught himself 5 more. He studied recordings of the great pianists, analyzing their technique, their interpretation, their style. His roommate, Tyler, came from a wealthy family in New York. His father was a surgeon, his mother was a lawyer, and they had been planning his musical career since he was born. Tyler was talented, but he couldn't understand Alex's drive. "You don't have to practice like your life depends on it," Tyler would say. "Your parents aren't going to disown you if you don't become famous." But Tyler didn't understand. Alex wasn't just practicing for himself. He was practicing for his parents, who had sacrificed everything. He was practicing for his grandmother, who had given up her own musical dreams. He was practicing for every immigrant family that believed their children could have better lives. The pressure was enormous, but it also gave him strength. When his fingers hurt too much to continue, he thought about his father's hands, cracked and scarred from factory work. When he felt lonely and homesick, he remembered his mother's tears of joy the first time she heard him play. By his 2nd year, Alex was outperforming students who had been studying twice as long. His teachers started entering him in competitions, where he faced the best young pianists in the country. He didn't always win, but he always learned something new. Professor Chen became like a second mother to him. She understood the weight he carried, the expectation that he would justify his family's sacrifices. She taught him that music wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about telling the truth through sound. "Your job is not to impress people," she would say during their weekly lessons. "Your job is to move them, to make them feel something they have never felt before." Alex began to understand that his humble background was actually an advantage. He had experienced struggle in ways that his wealthy classmates never had. He could put real emotion into pieces about hardship, about hope, about dreams deferred and dreams fulfilled. In his 3rd year, he began composing his own music. Late at night, in the empty practice rooms, he would create melodies that told his story. The story of a little boy who found magic in an old piano, who turned sacrifice into beauty, who carried his family's dreams in his fingertips. The other students started coming to listen when he played his original pieces. There was something different about them, something authentic that you couldn't learn from textbooks or expensive teachers. They came from a place that technique alone could never reach. Alex's parents visited once a semester, wearing their best clothes and feeling proud but out of place. They would sit in the back of student recitals, tears in their eyes, watching their son command the stage like he was born for it. "He's going to be somebody important," his mother would whisper to his father. "He already is," his father would reply. By his final year, Alex was the star of the conservatory. Agents and managers were already calling, offering contracts and opportunities. But Alex wasn't ready to leave yet. He had one more dream to fulfill, one more goal to reach. He was going to compose a masterpiece, something that would honor everything his family had given him, something that would prove that great art could come from anywhere, even from a factory worker's son who learned to play on a broken piano. He didn't know that this masterpiece would eventually lead him to the greatest triumph of his life, followed by the most devastating moment he could ever imagine. After graduating from conservatory, Alex faced a choice that would define his entire future. Record labels wanted him to make albums of popular classical pieces, the same music that every pianist recorded. Concert halls offered him tours playing the standard repertoire that audiences expected to hear. But Alex had a different dream burning inside him. He wanted to create something new, something that had never existed before. He wanted to write music that would tell the story of people like his parents, like his grandmother, like millions of immigrants who had left everything behind for a chance at a better life. He rented a tiny apartment above a coffee shop in the arts district of the city. The rent was cheap because the building was old and the neighbors were noisy, but it had one thing Alex needed: a piano. Not a good piano, just an old upright that the previous tenant had left behind, but it would have to do. For 3 years, Alex lived like a monk. He worked part-time giving piano lessons to children, just enough to pay rent and buy food. Every other moment was dedicated to his composition. He filled notebook after notebook with musical ideas, crossing out as much as he kept, searching for something perfect. The piece began to take shape slowly, like a sculpture emerging from a block of marble. He called it Symphony for the Forgotten, a 45-minute orchestral work that would tell the story of people whose names would never appear in history books, but whose dreams and struggles deserved to be remembered. The first movement was about leaving home. Alex poured his grandmother's stories into the music. The fear of stepping onto a ship bound for an unknown country. The sadness of leaving family behind. The hope that somewhere across the ocean, life could be better. The melody was haunting and beautiful, full of longing and uncertainty. The second movement captured the struggle of starting over. Alex thought about his parents' first years in America, working jobs they were overqualified for, learning a new language, facing discrimination and loneliness. The music was complex and sometimes harsh, but always moving forward, never giving up. The third movement was about building a new life. Here, Alex wove in themes of community, of neighbors helping neighbors, of children playing in the streets while their parents worked double shifts. The harmony was warmer here, suggesting that even in struggle there could be joy and connection. But it was the fourth and final movement that consumed Alex completely. This was about hope fulfilled, about dreams passed from one generation to the next. He wrote themes that represented parents sacrificing for their children, children achieving things their parents had never imagined possible. It was personal and universal at the same time. The technical challenges were enormous. Alex was writing for a full orchestra, strings, woodwinds, brass, and percussion. He had to understand how each instrument worked, what it could and couldn't do, how different sections could work together or against each other to create the emotions he wanted. He spent days in the conservatory library, studying the scores of great composers, analyzing how they created their effects. He attended orchestra rehearsals, watching how conductors worked with musicians, learning how written notes became living sound. Sometimes he would get stuck for weeks on a single phrase. How do you write music that captures the feeling of a mother working 3 jobs to pay for her child's education? How do you translate into notes the pride of a father watching his son graduate from college when he himself never learned to read? Alex would walk through his old neighborhood, listening to the sounds of daily life, children laughing, dogs barking, cars honking, people calling to each other in a dozen different languages. He tried to capture all of it in his music, to create a symphony that sounded like America itself. His friends from conservatory thought he was crazy. They were building successful careers, playing established repertoire, earning good money, getting their names in programs at respectable venues. Alex was living in poverty, working on something that might never be performed. "You could be making a living," his friend Tyler said during one of their rare meetings. "There are orchestras that would hire you tomorrow. Why are you torturing yourself with this?" But Alex couldn't explain the fire that drove him. He knew that most composers were forgotten within a generation. The only ones remembered were those who had something unique to say, something that couldn't be said any other way. He believed his symphony could be one of those rare pieces. The composing process was exhausting, physically and emotionally. Alex would work for 12 hours straight, then collapse into bed, his head spinning with melodies and harmonies. He dreamed in music, waking up with new ideas that he would rush to write down before they disappeared. His parents worried about him. When they visited, they saw their son getting thinner, more obsessed, more isolated from the world. They didn't understand why he was struggling when he could be successful doing what he already knew how to do. "Music is supposed to make you happy," his mother said gently. "You look like it's making you sick." But Alex couldn't stop. He was close to something extraordinary. He could feel it. Every day brought new discoveries, new ways to make the orchestra tell his story. He was learning to paint with sound, to sculpt with silence, to build cathedrals out of melody and rhythm. The breakthrough came in his third year of work. During a thunderstorm that knocked out the power in his building, Alex sat at his piano in the dark, playing by feel, and suddenly understood what the ending of his symphony needed. It wasn't about triumph or victory. It was about continuity, about the endless cycle of dreams passing from parents to children. He wrote frantically by candlelight, afraid the inspiration would vanish. The final pages of his symphony captured something he had been reaching for all along, the sound of hope itself. Fragile but unbreakable, always ready to begin again. When he finished writing the last note, Alex sat in his small apartment and cried. He had done something he wasn't sure was possible. He had taken his family's story, his community's story, and turned it into art that could last forever. But writing the symphony was only the beginning. Now he had to convince someone to perform it. He needed an orchestra, a conductor, a concert hall, and an audience. He needed people to believe in his music the way he believed in it. Alex made copies of his score and began the long process of submission to orchestras and conductors around the country. Most never responded. Others sent polite rejection letters. "While your work shows promise," they would write, "we must focus on repertoire that our audiences expect." Month after month, the rejections piled up. Alex took on more piano students to support himself, but every free moment was spent promoting his symphony. He attended concerts and tried to meet conductors afterward. He wrote letters to music critics and arts administrators. He posted recordings online and sent them to anyone who might listen. The break came from an unexpected source. Professor Chen, his old teacher from conservatory, had become friends with the music director of the Metropolitan Orchestra. She convinced him to listen to a recording of Alex playing the piano reduction of his symphony. Maestro Rodriguez was skeptical at first. Young composers submitted pieces to him constantly, most of them either too academic to move audiences or too simple to challenge musicians. But when he heard Alex's symphony, something clicked. The music told a story that needed telling. It was sophisticated enough for professional musicians, but accessible enough for regular people. It honored the tradition of classical music while saying something completely new. Most importantly, it came from a place of genuine emotion, not just technical cleverness. The phone call changed Alex's life. Maestro Rodriguez wanted to perform the symphony with the Metropolitan Orchestra, one of the most prestigious ensembles in the country. They would premiere it at Lincoln Center, the most famous concert hall in America. Alex hung up the phone and immediately called his parents. His mother screamed with joy so loudly that neighbors came to check if everything was okay. His father, the quiet man who rarely showed emotion, wept openly for the second time in Alex's memory. The next few months were a whirlwind of preparation. Alex worked with the orchestra's librarians to prepare the individual parts for each musician. He attended rehearsals, hearing his music come to life with real instruments for the first time. He did interviews with classical music magazines and local newspapers, But most importantly, he practiced. The symphony included a piano part that Alex would perform himself. It wasn't the most difficult music he had ever played technically, but it was the most meaningful. Every note carried the weight of his family's dreams, his community's struggles, his own hopes for the future. The premiere was scheduled for October 15th. Tickets sold out within hours. Critics from major publications planned to attend. Music industry professionals flew in from around the country. Alex's symphony had become the most anticipated classical music event of the year. Everything Alex had worked for, everything his family had sacrificed for, would be decided in 45 minutes on a stage in front of 2,000 people. He had created something beautiful, something meaningful, something that honored the forgotten stories that deserved to be remembered. He had no way of knowing that one tiny mistake, one single wrong note would change everything forever. October 15th dawned crisp and clear, the kind of perfect autumn day that feels like a good omen. Alex woke up in his hotel room at 6 a.m., unable to sleep any longer. Tonight, after 3 years of work, after a lifetime of preparation, his symphony would premiere at Lincoln Center. He looked out the window at the city waking up below. Somewhere in those streets were his parents who had flown in for the first time in their lives. They were staying at a small hotel near the airport, overwhelmed by the size and noise of the city, but determined to be there for their son's biggest moment. Alex spent the morning in quiet preparation. He ate a light breakfast, did his usual warm-up exercises, and ran through the most challenging passages of his piano part one final time. He had practiced this music so many times that his fingers could play it without his conscious mind being involved, but he needed to feel confident and ready. The afternoon brought a final rehearsal with the full orchestra. Walking into Avery Fisher Hall, Alex felt a thrill that never got old. The vast space seemed to hum with anticipation. 85 of the world's finest musicians were assembled to bring his creation to life. Maestro Rodriguez gathered the orchestra and spoke briefly. "Tonight we're not just performing music," he said. "We're telling a story that needs to be told. We're giving voice to people who have been silent for too long. Play with your hearts as well as your hands." The rehearsal went flawlessly. Each section of the orchestra had mastered their parts. The violins sang the opening melody with perfect intonation. The brass section brought power and majesty to the climactic moments. The woodwinds added colors that made the harmony shimmer and glow. When Alex played his piano solo in the third movement, the entire orchestra fell silent to listen. This was the heart of the symphony, where one instrument carried the weight of all the stories being told. His fingers found every note exactly where it needed to be, and the music flowed like water, finding its natural course. After rehearsal, Alex had 2 hours to rest and prepare. He went back to his hotel room and called his parents. They were nervous and excited, getting ready for an evening they never could have imagined when he was a little boy playing on his grandmother's broken piano. "We're so proud of you," his mother said, her voice thick with emotion. "Your grandmother would have loved to see this day." His father, ever practical, wanted to know if Alex had eaten enough and if he felt ready. "You've worked so hard for this," he said. "Just remember that no matter what happens tonight, you've already succeeded. You've already done something amazing." As evening approached, Alex put on his formal concert attire, a black tuxedo that had been specially tailored for this performance. He looked at himself in the mirror and saw not just a young composer about to debut his work, but a representation of everyone who had helped him reach this moment. The backstage area at Lincoln Center buzzed with pre-concert energy. Orchestra members warmed up in practice rooms. Stage crew made final adjustments to the lighting and acoustics. Ushers prepared to welcome an audience that included some of the most important people in classical music. An hour before curtain time, Alex walked out onto the empty stage and sat at the concert grand piano. The hall was vast and silent, filled with 2,000 empty seats that would soon hold 2,000 people listening to his music. He played a few quiet scales, feeling the responsiveness of the instrument under his fingers. Maestro Rodriguez joined him on stage. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Ready," Alex replied, and he meant it. He had prepared for this moment his entire life. Every lesson, every practice session, every small performance had been leading to this night. The doors opened to the public at 7 p.m. Alex watched from a backstage monitor as people streamed into the hall. There were familiar faces from the classical music world, critics whose reviews could make or break careers, conductors from other orchestras, composers whose work Alex had studied and admired. But there were also regular people, drawn by the story of a young immigrant son who had written a symphony about the American dream, families who looked like Alex's family, people who rarely attended classical concerts but felt connected to the story his music promised to tell. In the VIP section, Alex spotted his parents. His mother wore a dress she had bought specially for this occasion, and his father had on the same suit he wore to important family events. They looked nervous and proud, taking pictures of everything, trying to capture a moment they knew they would remember forever. The orchestra members took their places at 7:30. Alex watched them file onto the stage with their instruments, these incredible musicians who had dedicated their lives to making beautiful sound. In a few minutes, they would bring his notes to life in ways he had dreamed about but never quite experienced. At 7:45, Alex made his entrance. The audience applauded warmly as he walked to the piano. He adjusted the bench height, placed his hands on the keys for a moment to center himself, then looked out at the sea of faces. Somewhere in that crowd were music critics who could launch his career with a positive review, record label executives who might want to sign him, other composers who would judge whether his work deserved to stand alongside the great symphonies of the past. But Alex tried to focus on why he had written this music in the first place. It wasn't for critics or industry professionals. It was for his parents, his grandmother, his community. It was for everyone who had ever left home in search of something better. Everyone who had sacrificed for their children's dreams. Maestro Rodriguez took his place at the podium. The concert hall fell silent. 2,000 people held their breath. The maestro raised his baton, and Alex positioned his hands over the piano keys. The symphony began with a single note from a solo violin, high and clear and achingly beautiful. It was joined by other strings, then woodwinds, building slowly like dawn breaking over a new world. This was the moment Alex had imagined thousands of times, but hearing it live with a full orchestra in a perfect acoustic space was more magnificent than anything he had dreamed. The first movement unfolded like a story being told by the most gifted storyteller in the world. Every phrase had meaning. Every transition felt inevitable. The audience was completely absorbed, following the musical narrative as it traced the journey from old world to new. Alex's first entrance came 12 minutes into the piece. His hands found the keys and added their voice to the orchestral conversation. The piano part wove in and out of the orchestral texture, sometimes leading, sometimes supporting, always serving the larger story. The second movement brought more complexity, both musical and emotional. This was about the struggle of starting over, and the music reflected that with more challenging harmonies and rhythms. But underneath the difficulty was always the thread of hope, the melody that suggested better days ahead. Critics later said that by the end of the second movement, they knew they were witnessing something special. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every note. Even the most jaded music industry professionals found themselves moved by the honesty and beauty of Alex's composition. The third movement was where Alex's piano took center stage. This was his moment to speak directly to the audience, to tell his personal part of the larger story. As his fingers moved across the keys, he thought about every person who had helped him reach this moment, every sacrifice that had made this night possible. The melody soared and dipped, sometimes gentle like a lullaby, sometimes powerful like a declaration of independence. Alex felt completely connected to the music, like he was channeling something larger than himself. His technique was flawless, but more importantly, his heart was completely open. As the third movement concluded and led into the finale, Alex felt a moment of pure joy. Everything was going perfectly. The orchestra was playing beautifully, the audience was completely engaged, and his music was saying exactly what he had hoped it would say. The fourth movement began with all the confidence and power Alex could have wished for. This was about dreams fulfilled, about the next generation reaching heights their parents had never imagined. The music built toward a climax that would celebrate not just individual success, but the triumph of hope over hardship. Alex could see his parents in the audience, tears streaming down their faces as they heard their story told in the most beautiful way possible. He could feel the energy of 2,000 people completely absorbed in his creation, He had no idea that in just a few minutes, everything would change. He had no way of knowing that his greatest triumph was about to become his greatest nightmare, all because of one tiny movement of one finger that would land on the wrong key. But for now, in this perfect moment, Alex was exactly where he belonged, doing exactly what he was born to do, sharing his gift with the world in the most magnificent way possible. The fourth movement was building to its magnificent climax when Alex first felt it, a tiny tremor in his right hand that lasted less than a second. It was so brief that he almost convinced himself he had imagined it. His fingers continued moving across the keys with their usual precision, and the music flowed without interruption. But somewhere deep in his mind, a small alarm bell started ringing. Alex had noticed this strange tremor a few times over the past months, always during moments of stress or exhaustion. He had dismissed it as nerves, as the natural tension that comes with intense practice and high-pressure performances. The orchestra was playing magnificently around him. The strings soared with the main melody while the brass section added power and grandeur. The woodwinds wove intricate patterns that made the harmony sparkle and shine. Everything was building toward the moment that would define his entire symphony. Alex pushed the worry from his mind and focused on the music. This was the culmination of 3 years of work, the moment when all the themes of his symphony would come together in a final statement of hope and triumph. His parents were in the audience, tears of joy streaming down their faces. Critics were leaning forward in their seats, recognizing that they were witnessing something truly special. The piano part in this final section was technically demanding but not impossible. Alex had practiced these passages thousands of times. His muscle memory was so strong that he could probably play them in his sleep. Every note was exactly where his fingers expected it to be. But as the music reached its emotional peak, the tremor came back. This time it was stronger, more noticeable. Alex's right hand shook for almost a full second, causing him to miss the timing on a rapid scale passage. He recovered quickly, getting back in sync with the orchestra. But the moment of uncertainty sent a chill through his entire body. The audience didn't notice. The mistake was too small, too brief to register with people who weren't professional musicians. But Alex felt it like a punch to the stomach. His hands were his livelihood, his identity, his connection to everything he loved about music. They weren't supposed to betray him like this. He forced himself to concentrate on the music. Only 30 more seconds until the final climactic passage, the moment that would bring his symphony to its triumphant conclusion. The orchestra was building to a massive crescendo, and Alex's piano part would lead them through the final triumphant statement of the main theme. But the tremor was getting worse. Alex could feel his right hand becoming unstable, the muscles twitching in ways he couldn't control. He gripped the piano bench with his left hand, trying to steady himself, praying that he could just hold on for 30 more seconds. The moment arrived. The final, soaring melody that would cap his symphony with a statement of pure hope and victory. Alex's right hand rose to play the opening phrase, a simple but beautiful line that would lead into the orchestral finale. That's when it happened. His index finger, the finger that had found the right keys millions of times before, trembled violently just as he was about to strike the note. Instead of hitting the B natural that the music called for, his finger landed on B flat, a half step lower. The wrong note rang out through Lincoln Center like a discordant alarm bell. In the context of the surrounding harmony, that single flat note created a dissonance so jarring, so unexpected, that it seemed to poison the air itself. The beautiful melody that should have soared instead crashed to earth with an ugly metallic clash. Alex froze. His hands hovered over the keys as the horrible sound echoed through the concert hall. The orchestra, confused by the unexpected harmony, wavered for a moment before continuing, but the damage was done. The perfect arc of the symphony had been broken by one wrong note that seemed to come from nowhere. In the audience, Alex could see faces changing from joy to confusion. His parents looked worried, not understanding what had happened but sensing that something was wrong. Music critics who had been preparing to write glowing reviews suddenly had their pens hovering over their notepads, uncertain about what they had just heard. Alex forced his hands back to the keys and played the correct note, trying to salvage the final moments of his symphony, but his right hand was shaking visibly now, the tremor no longer hiding itself. Every note felt uncertain. Every phrase threatened to collapse under the weight of his fear. The orchestra finished the symphony powerfully, their final chords ringing through the hall with proper majesty and triumph. But Alex barely heard them. He was staring at his hands in horror, watching them shake like leaves in a storm, understanding for the first time that something was seriously wrong. The audience applauded, but their response was polite rather than enthusiastic. There were no standing ovations, no shouts of bravo that usually greet successful premieres. People clapped because it was the appropriate thing to do. But Alex could see the uncertainty in their faces. Maestro Rodriguez approached the piano with a concerned expression. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly so the audience couldn't hear. Alex tried to smile and nod, but his hands were still shaking. "I'm fine," he said, though they both knew it was a lie. "Just nerves, I think." The traditional post-concert reception felt like a nightmare. People congratulated Alex on his symphony, but their words felt hollow and careful. They praised the composition itself while carefully avoiding any mention of the performance. Industry professionals who had been eager to meet him before the concert now seemed to keep their distance. Alex's parents found him in the crowd, their faces full of concern and confusion. "What happened up there?" his mother asked gently. "Your hands were shaking." "I don't know," Alex admitted, and it was the truth. He had no idea what was happening to him, but he knew it was serious. His hands, which had been steady and reliable his entire life, had failed him at the most important moment of his career. The reviews that appeared in newspapers and online publications over the next few days were devastating. Critics who had been prepared to celebrate a new American masterpiece instead wrote about promising composition marred by uncertain performance and technical difficulties that undermined an otherwise impressive work. But worse than the professional reviews were the personal doubts that began eating away at Alex's confidence. He tried to practice in his hotel room the next day, but his hands continued to shake. Simple passages that he had mastered years ago suddenly felt impossible. Notes that had always been automatic now required intense concentration. Alex flew home to his small apartment, canceling the interviews and meetings that had been scheduled to follow his premiere. He told himself that it was just stress, just the pressure of the big performance getting to him. But deep down, he knew that something fundamental had changed. For the next 2 weeks, he barely left his apartment. He would sit at his piano for hours, trying to play simple scales, watching his hands shake and tremble like they belonged to someone else. The tremor was subtle most of the time, but it became worse whenever he tried to play anything technically demanding. His friends from conservatory called to check on him, having heard about the performance. Alex made excuses, claiming he was just tired, just taking a break after the intensity of the premiere. But he could hear the worry in their voices, and he knew that word was spreading through the classical music community that something was wrong. The worst part was the isolation. Alex had always been able to find comfort and peace at the piano. No matter what was happening in his life, he could sit down and play and the music would make everything better. But now the piano felt like a source of anxiety rather than comfort. He started avoiding phone calls from his parents, knowing they would ask questions he couldn't answer. He stopped checking his email, afraid of reading reviews or cancellation notices from venues that had been interested in booking him for future performances. 3 weeks after the premiere, Alex finally admitted to himself that he needed help. Something was wrong with his hands, something that wasn't going to go away on its own. He made an appointment with a doctor, hoping against hope that it would turn out to be something simple, something easily fixed. But as he sat in the waiting room, watching his hands shake as he filled out the medical forms, Alex knew in his heart that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't imagine. The wrong note at Lincoln Center hadn't been a simple mistake. It had been a warning sign of something much worse coming. The boy who had found magic in an old piano, who had turned his family's dreams into beautiful music, who had spent his entire life preparing for moments like the one at Lincoln Center, was about to discover that sometimes the most devastating losses come not from external forces, but from the betrayal of your own body. And there was nothing his talent, his dedication, or his dreams could do to stop what was coming. Dr. Jennifer Martinez had been a neurologist for 15 years, but she had never had to deliver this kind of news to someone so young. She looked at Alex sitting across from her desk, his hands folded carefully in his lap to hide the tremor that had brought him to her office. "The tests confirm what I suspected," she said gently. "You have essential tremor." It's a neurological condition that affects the motor control in your hands and sometimes other parts of your body. Alex felt the words hit him like physical blows. He had been hoping for something simple. Maybe vitamin deficiency, maybe stress, maybe something that could be fixed with rest or medication. But the look on Dr. Martinez's face told him this was serious. "What does that mean exactly?" he asked, though part of him already knew the answer. Dr. Martinez pulled out a chart showing the progression of the condition. Essential tremor is progressive, which means it gets worse over time. Right now your symptoms are relatively mild, but they will continue to develop. Eventually, fine motor control becomes very difficult or impossible. The room seemed to spin around Alex. He gripped the arms of his chair, feeling like he might fall even though he was sitting down. "How long do I have?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's hard to say exactly. The progression varies from person to person. Some people maintain reasonable function for many years. Others deteriorate more quickly. But for someone whose livelihood depends on precise finger movements..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. Alex stared at his hands, watching the slight tremor that had destroyed his premiere, and was now threatening to destroy his entire future. These hands had been his partners since childhood, his tools for creating beauty, his connection to everything he loved about life. Now they were turning against him. Is there any treatment? Any way to stop it or slow it down? The desperation in his voice was obvious, and Dr. Martinez's sympathetic expression told him the answer before she spoke. "We can try medications that sometimes help reduce the symptoms, but they don't work for everyone, and they don't stop the progression. There are also some surgical options for severe cases, but they're risky and not always successful." Alex left the doctor's office in a daze. He walked through the city streets for hours, not really seeing where he was going, trying to process what he had just learned. At 28 years old, his career as a performer was essentially over. Everything he had worked for, everything his family had sacrificed for, was disappearing because of a condition he couldn't control or cure. He couldn't bring himself to call his parents right away. How do you tell the people who gave up everything for your dreams that those dreams are dead? How do you explain to parents who immigrated to give their child opportunities that those opportunities are being taken away by his own body? Instead, Alex went home and sat at his piano. He tried to play a simple scale, watching his fingers miss notes and stumble over passages that had once been effortless. The tremor was subtle but persistent, making every note feel uncertain and unstable. He attempted one of Chopin's easier pieces, something he had learned as a teenager, and played thousands of times. But even this simple music felt impossible now. His right hand couldn't maintain the delicate touch that the piece required. The melody that should have been smooth and lyrical came out choppy and uneven. Alex slammed the piano lid shut and buried his face in his hands. For the first time since he was 7 years old, he couldn't find comfort in music. The piano, which had been his refuge and his joy, now felt like a cruel reminder of everything he was losing. The next few weeks were the darkest of Alex's life. He canceled all his upcoming performances, claiming illness. Concert halls that had been interested in booking him stopped calling. Recording labels that had been courting him moved on to other artists. The classical music world, which moves quickly and has little patience for uncertainty, began to forget about the promising young composer who had stumbled at his big moment. Alex's savings started running out.
He had been living carefully, but he hadn't planned for a complete loss of income.
The piano lessons he taught became his only source of money, but even those were difficult now. Students and their parents began to notice that his hands weren't as steady as they used to be. His parents finally came to visit after 3 weeks of avoided phone calls. Alex couldn't hide his condition from them face to face. When they saw their son struggling to play simple melodies, both of them cried. "There has to be something," his mother said desperately. "Maybe a different doctor, maybe a treatment we don't know about." But Alex had already spent weeks researching essential tremor online, reading medical journals, contacting specialists around the country. The answer was always the same. There was no cure, and the progression was inevitable. His father, the practical man who had worked with his hands his entire life, understood immediately what this meant. "What will you do?" he asked simply. "I don't know," Alex admitted. It was the first time in his life that he had no plan, no goal, no sense of direction. Music had been his identity for so long that he couldn't imagine who he was without it. The worst part was the isolation. Alex's friends from the music world didn't know how to relate to him anymore. They were building careers, winning competitions, getting recording contracts while he was facing the end of everything they all aspired to. Their successes felt like salt in his wounds, and their sympathy felt like pity. He stopped going to concerts because hearing other pianists play made the loss too painful. He avoided music stores, practice rooms, anywhere that reminded him of what he used to be able to do. His world shrank down to his small apartment, where he spent most days staring at the wall or sleeping. The medications Dr. Martinez prescribed helped slightly, but not enough to matter. Alex could hold a cup of coffee more steadily, but he still couldn't play piano passages that required precision and speed. The tremor was like having a tiny earthquake in his hands that never quite stopped. 3 months after his diagnosis, Alex's money ran out completely. He had to give up his apartment and move back in with his parents, sleeping in his childhood bedroom like he was a teenager again. The walls were still covered with pictures from his performing career, awards, newspaper clippings, photos with famous musicians. Now they felt like monuments to a dead dream. His parents never complained about supporting him, but Alex could see the strain it put on them. They were both getting older, and having to carry their adult son financially wasn't what they had planned for their retirement years. The son who was supposed to take care of them someday was now dependent on them again. Depression settled over Alex like a heavy blanket. He would lie in bed for most of the day, seeing no point in getting up. The future that had once seemed so bright and full of possibility now looked empty and meaningless. What was the point of anything if he couldn't make music? His mother tried to encourage him to find other interests, other careers. "You're still young," she would say. "You could go back to school, learn something new." But Alex couldn't imagine caring about anything else. Music wasn't just what he did, it was who he was. Asking him to find a new career was like asking him to become a different person entirely. The classical music community moved on without him. New young pianists emerged to take his place. His symphony, which had received mixed reviews after his shaky performance, was quietly shelved. The piece he had spent 3 years creating was gathering dust, unlikely ever to be performed again. 6 months after his diagnosis, Alex hit rock bottom. He had gained weight from inactivity and depression. His hands had gotten worse, the tremor now visible even when he wasn't trying to use them. He felt like a ghost haunting his own life, watching from the outside as the world continued without him. But even in his darkest moments, Alex couldn't completely let go of music. Sometimes late at night when he couldn't sleep, he would sneak downstairs and very quietly play simple melodies on his parents' old piano. The music was imperfect now, marked by the tremor that had destroyed his career. But it was still music. And sometimes, in those quiet midnight moments, Alex would remember something Dr. Martinez had mentioned in passing. That essential tremor affected fine motor control, but not necessarily musicality or creativity. His hands might be betraying him, but his musical mind was still intact. He didn't know it yet, but in that realization lay the seed of his redemption. The journey back wouldn't be what he had planned, and it wouldn't look anything like the career he had lost. But music in some form wasn't finished with him yet. The question was whether Alex was ready to discover what that might mean. 18 months had passed since Alex's diagnosis, and he felt like he was drowning in slow motion. Every day was the same. Wake up late, eat breakfast in silence while his parents tried to pretend everything was normal, then retreat to his childhood bedroom, where he would stare at the ceiling and wonder how his life had fallen apart so completely. His mother had taken down most of the awards and photos from his walls, thinking they were making his depression worse. But somehow the empty walls were even more depressing, like his past had been erased along with his future. The tremor had gotten worse, just as Dr. Martinez had predicted. Alex's right hand now shook visibly even when he was resting, and his left hand was starting to show signs of the condition too. Simple tasks like buttoning shirts or writing his name had become challenging. The idea of playing piano at a professional level seemed as impossible as flying to the moon. His parents worried constantly, but tried not to show it. His father had taken on extra shifts at the factory to make up for the financial strain of supporting their adult son. His mother would sometimes sit outside his bedroom door, listening for any sign that he was okay, afraid that the depression might lead to something worse. They had tried everything they could think of to help him. They suggested therapy, which Alex refused. They brought him brochures for community college courses, which he threw in the trash. They even asked if he wanted to visit his grandmother's grave, thinking that remembering her love for music might somehow help. But Alex couldn't bear the thought of disappointing her memory with his failure. The classical music world had moved on completely. New composers were being celebrated, new performers were winning competitions, and Alex's name was rarely mentioned anymore. When it was usually with phrases like promising career cut short or tragic case of unfulfilled potential. His former classmates from conservatory were establishing themselves in the industry. Tyler had gotten a position with a major orchestra. Others were touring as soloists or recording albums. Their social media posts about concerts and achievements felt like daggers to Alex's heart, so he stopped looking at them entirely. The worst part was the silence. Alex's life had always been filled with music, practicing, performing, composing, listening. Now there was just quiet, broken only by the sound of his parents tiptoeing around the house, afraid to disturb him. The absence of music felt like the absence of oxygen. He had tried a few times to sit at the piano, but every attempt ended in frustration and tears. The music that came out was a shadow of what it used to be, marked by missed notes and shaky rhythms. It was like trying to speak in a language he was forgetting, watching the words slip away even as he reached for them. Physical therapy hadn't helped. The medications had reached their maximum effectiveness, which wasn't much. Alex had read about experimental treatments, but they were expensive, risky, and unlikely to restore the precision he needed for professional performance. One particularly dark Tuesday morning, Alex was lying in bed at noon when his mother knocked on his door. "There's someone here to see you," she said gently. Alex groaned. He had stopped receiving visitors months ago, unable to face the pity in people's eyes or answer their well-meaning questions about what he planned to do next. "Tell them I'm not feeling well," he called back. "It's someone from the community center," his mother persisted. "She says it's important." Alex reluctantly got dressed and went downstairs to find a woman in her 50s waiting in the living room. She introduced herself as Rosa Martinez, the director of the Riverside Community Center, where Alex had sometimes volunteered during high school. "I know you're going through a difficult time," she said directly, without the careful dancing around the subject that most people did. "But I have a problem, and I think you might be able to help me solve it." Alex almost laughed bitterly. "I don't think I can help anyone with anything right now." Rosa pulled out a folder of photos. "These are some of the kids in our after-school program. Many of them come from families that can't afford music lessons, but they're interested in learning. We have an old piano that someone donated, but no one to teach them how to use it." Alex looked at the photos of children ranging from about 6 to 12 years old. Their faces were bright and eager, full of the same curiosity about music that he remembered feeling at their age. But the idea of trying to teach them while dealing with his own condition seemed impossible. "I can't play anymore," he said bluntly. "My hands shake. I can barely manage simple pieces, let alone demonstrate anything for students." "I'm not asking you to be a concert pianist," Rosa replied. "I'm asking you to share what you know about music with kids who have never had that opportunity. You understand music in ways that go beyond just technical skill." Alex shook his head. "You don't understand. I can't even play chopsticks reliably anymore. How am I supposed to teach anyone anything?" Rosa was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Do you remember what it felt like when you first touched a piano? When you first discovered that those keys could make beautiful sounds?" Despite himself, Alex found his mind drifting back to his grandmother's old piano, to the wonder he felt as a 7-year-old discovering that he could create magic with his fingers. It seemed like a lifetime ago. "These kids have never experienced that," Rosa continued. "They've never had anyone show them that music is a language they can learn to speak. Your hands might not be as steady as they used to be, but your knowledge and your passion are still there." Alex wanted to say no. The thought of sitting at a piano in front of children, letting them see his hands shake and his technique fail, felt humiliating. But something in Rosa's voice reminded him of his old teachers, the ones who had believed in him when he was just a factory worker's son with big dreams. "I'll think about it," he said finally, which was more than he had committed to anything in months. That night, Alex couldn't stop thinking about the photos Rosa had shown him. The children's faces reminded him of his own childhood, of the hunger for something beautiful in a world that often felt harsh and difficult. He remembered how music had been his escape, his hope, his way of imagining a different future. But the fear was stronger than the nostalgia. What if he tried to help these kids and couldn't? What if his condition made him an embarrassment? What if he let them down the way he felt he had let down everyone else who had believed in him? A week passed before Rosa called again. "Just come and meet them," she said. "No commitment beyond that. Just spend an hour with the kids and see what happens." Alex almost said no again, but something in his mother's hopeful expression made him pause. She had been watching him waste away for 18 months, and this was the first opportunity that had generated even a flicker of interest from him. 1 hour, he agreed reluctantly, but I'm not promising anything beyond that. The Riverside Community Center was in the neighborhood where Alex had grown up, a place where immigrant families worked hard and dreamed of better lives for their children. Walking through the doors felt like stepping back in time, remembering when he used to volunteer. There is a successful young musician who thought he had everything figured out. The after-school program was in a large room with mismatched furniture and cheerful posters on the walls. About 15 children were working on homework or playing games when Rosa led Alex to the corner, where an old upright piano sat against the wall. The piano was even more beat up than his grandmother's had been. Some of the keys stuck, others were out of tune, and the bench wobbled when you sat on it. But when Alex pressed a few keys experimentally, the basic sound was there, imperfect but honest. A little girl with pigtails looked up from her coloring book and stared at Alex with curiosity. "Are you going to play music?" she asked. Alex's hands were already shaking slightly from nerves, but he managed to play a simple C major scale. Even with the tremor, even with some keys sticking, the music was recognizable as music. More children began to gather around the piano, drawn by the sound. Alex played a simple melody, "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," and watched their faces light up with recognition and delight. "Can you teach me to do that?" asked a boy who looked about 8 years old. Alex looked at his shaking hands, then at the eager faces surrounding him, and realized that maybe Rosa had been right. Maybe there was something he could still offer, even if it wasn't what he had originally planned to give to the world. "I can try," he said, and for the first time in 18 months he meant it. 6 months later, Alex was a different person than the one who had reluctantly walked into the Riverside Community Center. He still had essential tremor. That hadn't changed and never would. His hands still shook and he still couldn't play the complex pieces that had once defined his identity. But something fundamental had shifted in how he understood what music could be. It started with 8-year-old Maria, the little girl with pigtails who had asked if he could teach her to play Twinkle. Twinkle, Little Star. Alex had been terrified that first day, certain his shaking hands would embarrass him, but Maria didn't care about his tremor. She only cared that someone was finally showing her how to make music. Alex discovered that teaching required different skills than performing. He had to break down complex concepts into simple steps, find ways to explain rhythm and melody to children who had never read a note of music. His hands might shake when he demonstrated, but his knowledge was solid. He could hear when a student was close to getting something right, and he could guide them to that moment of breakthrough. The old piano at the community center became his new concert hall. It was out of tune and missing several keys, but it served its purpose. Alex learned to work around its limitations, just as he was learning to work around his own. When the high C didn't work, he taught students to transpose their songs to a different key. When his right hand trembled too much for a demonstration, he played the melody with his left hand instead. More children joined the program as word spread through the neighborhood. Parents who worked double shifts brought their kids after school, grateful for a safe place where someone cared about their children's development. These families reminded Alex of his own, hard-working immigrants who sacrificed everything for their children's opportunities. Alex developed teaching methods he had never learned in conservatory. For students who couldn't afford sheet music, he taught them to play by ear. For children with learning disabilities, he found ways to use color coding and movement to help them understand rhythm. For kids who were too shy to play in front of others, he created opportunities for them to share their music privately. The breakthrough moment came when 9-year-old Carlos asked Alex why his hands shook. Instead of deflecting the question, Alex decided to be honest. "I have a condition that makes my hands tremble," he explained. "It means I can't play as precisely as I used to, but I can still make music. Sometimes the most beautiful things come from learning to work with our limitations instead of fighting against them." Carlos nodded seriously, then asked, "Can you teach me a song that sounds good even if you play some wrong notes?" That question changed everything for Alex. He began composing simple pieces specifically designed to sound beautiful even when played imperfectly. He wrote melodies that worked well with slight timing variations, harmonies that didn't depend on precise finger placement. He was creating music for real people with real limitations, not for perfectionists in concert halls. His students progressed in ways that amazed everyone. Maria, who had started with simple melodies, was soon playing basic classical pieces. Carlos discovered he had a gift for improvisation, creating his own variations on songs Alex taught him. A shy girl named Sophia found her confidence through music, gradually opening up as she learned to express herself through the piano. Alex realized he was learning as much from his students as he was teaching them. They approached music with joy and curiosity, unconcerned with technical perfection. They celebrated small victories, playing a scale smoothly, remembering a simple song, keeping steady rhythm. Their enthusiasm reminded Alex why he had fallen in love with music in the first place. The program grew. Rosa managed to secure funding for a better piano, one that stayed in tune and had all its keys working. Local musicians began volunteering their time, but they all looked to Alex as the program leader. He had created something special, a place where music was about expression and joy rather than competition and judgment. Alex's parents watched their son's transformation with amazement and relief. He was still living at home, still dealing with his condition, but he had found purpose again. He woke up each morning eager to go to the community center, excited to see what his students would accomplish that day. The local newspaper wrote a feature story about the program, describing Alex as a classical pianist whose career was derailed by illness, but who found new meaning in sharing music with underserved children. The article brought more volunteers and donations, but more importantly, it helped Alex see his story differently. He wasn't a failed concert pianist anymore. He was a teacher who had found a way to make music matter in people's lives. His tremor, which had seemed like a curse, had led him to discover gifts he didn't know he possessed. He had always been good at playing music. Now he was learning to be good at inspiring it in others. One evening, as Alex was helping Sophia work through a challenging passage, he realized that his hands weren't shaking as much as usual. The tremor was still there, it always would be, but it was less noticeable when he was focused on teaching, rather than on his own performance. Dr. Martinez had mentioned that stress often made essential tremor worse, while relaxation and purposeful activity could sometimes improve symptoms. Alex had been so focused on what he couldn't do anymore that he hadn't paid attention to what he could still accomplish. He began composing again, but this time his music had a different purpose. Instead of writing complex symphonies for professional orchestras, he created simple pieces that his students could learn and perform. He wrote songs that told stories about their neighborhood, their families, their dreams for the future. The annual Community Center talent show became Alex's new Lincoln Center. Watching Maria play a piece she had learned from him, seeing Carlos improvise a beautiful melody, hearing Sophia sing a song Alex had written about believing in yourself. These moments gave him the same thrill he had once felt performing for thousands of people. His symphony, Symphony for the Forgotten, was performed again, but this time by a youth orchestra made up of students from programs like his across the city. The performance wasn't technically perfect. There were missed notes, uncertain rhythms, moments when sections got out of sync. But the passion and meaning were unmistakable. Alex sat in the audience watching young musicians pour their hearts into his music and realized that this was what he had always been trying to achieve. Music that mattered to real people, that told stories worth telling, that created connections between human beings. After the concert, a parent approached Alex with tears in her eyes. "My daughter has never felt special at anything before," she said. "Music has given her confidence she never had. Thank you for seeing something in her that no one else saw." Alex understood then that his career hadn't ended at Lincoln Center. It had transformed. The wrong note that had seemed to destroy everything had actually led him to discover his true calling. He was still making music, still sharing his gift with the world, just not in the way he had originally planned. His students taught him that perfection wasn't the goal. Connection was. They showed him that music's greatest power wasn't in flawless technique, but in its ability to touch hearts and change lives. They reminded him that every person has a song inside them, waiting for someone to help them find it. As Alex locked up the community center that night, he sat at the piano one more time. His hands shook as they always did now, but he played a simple melody, one of the first songs he had taught Maria months ago. The notes weren't all perfect. The rhythm wasn't entirely steady. But the music was beautiful in its honesty. The little boy who had discovered magic in his grandmother's broken piano had grown up to become a man who found magic in broken places, in imperfect instruments, in struggling students, in his own damaged hands. He had learned that sometimes the most beautiful music comes not from having everything go right, but from finding ways to create beauty despite everything going wrong. Outside, the city hummed with its usual chaos and energy. Inside the quiet community center, Alex's music lingered in the air. Imperfect, honest, and more meaningful than any symphony he had ever written. He had finally found his masterpiece, and it wasn't a composition at all. It was a life spent helping others discover their own songs, their own ways of making music in a world that desperately needed more beauty, more hope, more connection. The maestro had learned to play a different kind of symphony, one written not on paper, but in the hearts of the children who would carry his teaching forward into their own futures. And in that quiet moment, Alex understood that this was how music truly lived forever, not in concert halls or recordings, but in the hands and hearts of people who had been touched by its magic and were now ready to share that magic with others.